Alright everyone, it's time to talk about something funny that several people messaged to me, which is that apparently Burlington, which is in Vermont, it's the only real city there, where our only real airport is. Rutland has an airport and it's hilarious. It's mostly for like people that want a train flight and stuff like that. Little plane, like little Cessnas and shit. I think they've got a plane that does the mail. It's really funny. Anyway, Burlington has declared racism to be a public health emergency. And I'm thinking about the racial demographics of Vermont and how funny this is, because Vermont is almost homogenous. It's like 97% white, non-Hispanic. There's no racism problem in Vermont. There are people who are not white in Vermont, and I've really never had an instance where anything weird had happened. Like, you don't get stories. Most of the time, the big story is like someone was cow tipping, and Bessie got tipped over and peed on herself. Front page news in Vermont, other than DUI and like vehicular shit, tends to be a joke because it's all small town. Farmer John's crops are really shitty this year. He might need a loan of $500 from the town for his farm. That's Vermont. It's like crime. It's like when Phil Scott decided to ram down our throats expansive Bloomberg-style gun legislation, which is one of the reasons we defeated Sue Minter, was because she was pushing the same bullshit. Then he gets in and does the same fucking shit with the well, there's been a shooting in another state, we need to take action. But there's no crime problem in the state of Vermont. The biggest crime we have is drug-related. And that was the pharmaceutical industry's fault. It's not Vermonters' fault. It wasn't anyone's fault other than a bunch of executives in corporate boardrooms, none of which ever saw the inside of a cell. How sad. Anyway, what public health emergency is posed by... The problem is this. They expand the definition of racism to meaninglessness. Racism initially meant you were mistreating, or in some cases becoming violent. You're paranoid about people from other racial groups. You perceive them as phenotypically different. And so your interactions were significantly altered. You walked the other way when you saw that black dude coming. You've been constantly cracking racial jokes about the Vietnamese or something. That's racism. Racism is not someone told a body joke 10 years on the ago on the internet. That's not racism. It's not bigotry for someone to suggest that genetics play a role in day-to-day life. It's not racism. Most of the things that are labeled racism are not racist. The same is true of sexist, misogynistic, misandrism. It's funny, the shoe can be on the other foot too. Like some MGTOW group will say, well, we're being mistreated because of a judicial differential that doesn't apply to me in my personal life. Well, it's not applied to you. The fact is that the only racism that's prevalent right now in the U.S., because the U.S. is more diverse and tolerant than most parts of the world. We need to come to that understanding as well. The idea of evil, racist, bigoted Americans is an old trope, and it's not true at all. The fact is this. The only form of racism, the only form of bigotry that's sort of held up and allowed, that's tolerated by society, and even promoted by billionaires and politicians at this point, is anti-white racism. The belief that the white race is homogenous and that it shares certain characteristics like this racial guilt and privilege is itself a very bigoted trope. If you were to spin that yarn about another race, except for occasionally East Asians, sometimes they attack them now too, because they say, well, they're the accepted minority. How dare they consider themselves racially pure or something, bullshit like that. If you were to do that, you'd be called bigoted. And by the way, they'd be right. When you look at a group of people, you homogenize them for stereotypical purposes, and you're doing it regardless of the reason, that is bigotry. Yes. It's like, the problem is this. Like, let's say that you've got a group of people, and like, let's say that you've got some island in the South Pacific, and this is kind of a lame example, but just bear with me and I'll try to explain the general idea. You have an island in the South Pacific where 90% of the population have moles on their asses. And so you start calling them mole ass or something like that. Well, you're being, number one, mean, but also you're stereotyping, and the stereotype doesn't always hold true. 10% of those people don't have a mole on their ass. You've conflated an aggregate with an individual. The fact is that if you talk about aggregates, you can make up all sorts of statistical analysis of that group of people. The problem is that individuals don't always, they diverge from that. So you might say, well, the average IQ within this race is 110. Well, yeah, but the person you're talking to from that race might have 150, or they might have 50. You'd need to individually test them. This is what I like to do. I look at people as individuals. I don't look at someone and say, well, you've got a certain skin color and certain thing between your legs, and therefore I can say X, Y, and Z about you. Because it's wrong. But it's become acceptable and even politically mainstream to do that about the white race. Of course, they never differentiate between like Irish and Italian background, or someone of Greek extraction and someone of Norwegian extraction. They just, it's like when they talk about white people cooking. That's the funniest part of their racial canard, is white people cooking. Like the idea that your chicken is seasoned with pepper and tears, stuff like that. Again, you've probably been to an Italian restaurant. Yeah. Where's Italy located? Who are the people who live in Italy? I think that we just got an answer to your question. Maybe North Scandinavian cooking aside. Apparently that's a lot of bullshit. Or English cooking other than a full English or something. It's basically, what was the old saying? Baked, boiled, and bland, I think was it. It's pretty funny. Some stereotypes are funny, see, and self-deprecation always is. But Burlington declaring racism a public health emergency, especially in a state like Vermont, again, it's largely homogenous. We don't really have a problem with racism there. Vermonters are very in your face. They're not going to stab you in the back and tell racial jokes about you behind your back. They're going to come up, slap you on the back, and say something naughty up front. It's just sort of the way Northern New Englanders tend to be. Other than the hippie element, but they're not New Englanders. They're all from the West Coast. Most of the racist shit that I ever heard, like when I was in Burlington, came from UVM students that were from other states. California, Washington State, like the Portland and Seattle areas. Places like that, New York, Florida. Not Vermonters. Hell, less than half the students at UVM are Vermonters. Why do you think they turned Castleton into a university? Now Vermont finally has one university that's majority Vermonter. It's very, very helpful. It's also cheaper and much better. Much less wokeness going on in Castleton. Probably because it's not in hippie-trippy-ville up there where Bernie Sanders was mayor. Now, there's no racism epidemic in Vermont. It's just a pile of shit. That's about all. Peace out.